On today's World Insight, looking back at President Biden's legacy as the outgoing U.S. president prepares to deliver his Oval Office farewell address. With domestic challenges proving tough to tackle and escalating conflicts abroad, how will President Biden be remembered?
Hello and welcome to World Insight. This edition of our program is coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. U.S. President Joe Biden is set to deliver his farewell address from the Oval Office on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern. The outgoing president from the U.S. is expected to defend his one-term legacy at home and abroad in the hope that history will be kind to him. Earlier this week, he said America is now, quote, stronger on the world stage and that his administration is leaving the next administration with a, quote, very strong hand to play. However, with escalating conflicts in Gaza and Ukraine, not to mention stubborn domestic challenges like high inflation, Biden's approval rating stands lower than his three predecessors. According to U.S. polling organization Gallup, Americans enter 2025 rating the economy negatively and are dissatisfied with the overall direction of the country. So, how might history judge the Biden administration, and how will the rest of the world be impacted by the power transition in Washington? Let's loop in our panelists. Joining us now in Washington, Peter Kuznick, a professor of history with American University. In New York, Max Wolf, founder of Systematic Ventures. In Beijing, Zhao Hai, director of the International Politics Program at the National Institute of Global Strategy. Also in Beijing, here in the studio, Einar Tangen, senior fellow at the Taihe Institute and chairman of Asia Narratives. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Well, we got analysts coming from both the U.S. And China to talk about what the Biden administration has left the United States and the world with. As tradition, gentlemen, you know, usually polling organizations ask Americans their views on the outgoing administration, whether they believe the president did a good job. However, their views is going to be reflected also in the general society. The latest one, Gallup, for example, recently polled more than 500 adults from over 50 states. Let's take a look at this. They found the majority of respondents said that they were not satisfied with Biden administration's performance in almost every category. More than 50% believe the country's lost the ground in the categories of federal debt, immigration, the wealth gap, the economy, the U.S. position in the world, and crime overall. Overall, also, Biden received a job approval rating of 42%, while the average of U.S. presidents from 1938 to 2024 is 52%. Of course, we could argue the polls might not be accurate to reflect the general picture, but it does strike a point about how people are looking at the current administration, at least for now. So to you, Professor Kuznick, you're a history professor. Probably you can tell us better about what is the reason behind this. Can you please?
Well, there are a number of reasons. You know, it's sad, but Biden will go down in history as having a failed presidency. He will go down as the man who brought Donald Trump back to office. And that's not a very good legacy. And much of it is out of his control, because what we're seeing across the board in almost all the democracies in the world is that the incumbent parties are losing. They're either losing ground or they're being voted out.
I see.
So what's happened in the United States is not an outlier in that regard. But Biden was tone deaf. He did not address the concerns that American people had. The fact that Donald Trump could run as the pro-peace and pro-working class candidate instead of Biden just shows how off base his presidency has been. But he did some good things. His infrastructure bill was certainly a step in the right direction. He was very concerned about climate change. That was very positive.
Yeah.
But he didn't address immigration. He didn't effectively address inflation. and his foreign policy has been a dismal failure.
All right.
So Biden's going to go down in history as, unfortunately, a badly failed president, one who was tone deaf, one who could not message, one who was too old for the job, and who surrounded himself with war hawks rather than people who supported diplomacy and peace.
Mr. Tangen?
Well, he's 50 years in politics. This caps his 50th year. He's had a long career. I think you have to give him some respect for that. I would agree with some of the statements that were made, but I think the real issue with him is that he did not really strike out on his own. I mean, he continued Donald Trump's foreign policy. In essence, he ran against tariffs, but then didn't take them off. He didn't seem to find a note. I mean, the areas where he was strongest was, rebuilding the coalition that he thought that Trump had destroyed. Unfortunately, in what direction is the question. Today, Europe is not doing well. Many blame the United States for pushing into Ukraine and then starting this war. So there's going to be a very mixed message, but you have to remember, he's been there for 50 years. He's part of the institution. He was one of the youngest senators at 30.
Okay. Mr. Wolf, your thoughts. You are working in the technology sector, both the safety issue, security issue, the latest AI, GPU, and the list that goes on. How is this administration likely to be remembered in those categories?
Yeah, so historically, the Democratic Party has been sort of the party of tech in California and Boston and New York, where American tech tends to happen, with some encroachment from Texas and some more traditionally red states. But I think the fact that there were tech folks who bought their way into the highest levels of power are going to associate the Republican Party for a while with the tech industry. So I think that's a shift. I think that the once super innovative sort of startup culture of tech has changed into the large incumbent trillion-dollar companies buying their small competitors. And so tech now looks more like other more mature industries, trying to prevent itself from being regulated and taxed and following that pattern. And so I think it's come over a bit, the tech community, to the Republican side. One thing I think was good about the Biden administration, even if it could have been better, is it was still an administration that was willing to talk to and work with the idea of international cooperation. Tech is a global business, and if you chop the markets up through tariffs and export restrictions, we all end up with less innovation and less development. And I fear that we could have done more there under the Biden administration than we did as a country.
Yeah.
But I'm hopeful, but pretty skeptical that we'll see a reopening under the incoming administration.
I would love to come back to you on some of the points you just made. They're fascinating because there are so many news related to some of the categories you just mentioned. But go to you, Mr. Zhao. Your thoughts, because in the foreign policy, we have noticed in Biden administration, both trade policies and also policies related to technology such as AI are being used as foreign policy tools. This is quite a unique phenomenon, shall we say, compared to his predecessor. So how do you see, as a current affairs expert, about all of these developments with this Biden administration?
Well, first of all, I think the Biden administration is not necessarily a failure, but it's not a success. I think they're on the two levels. First of all, there's not only a problem with Biden himself because he's old and some of his thoughts remain in like 20th century, but because of the system failure or the decay of the system, you've seen the polarization of politics in the United States that are persistent. And also in the second half of his administration, you can see that there is a very strong Republican presence in Congress and blocking basically all the motions from the White House. So the first half of his administration, he was able to push through some of the legislations which could be seen as success, but then the later second half is problematic. But on the personal level, he's also not very successful. What I mean by that is that he's not daring or have the political courage to fight against the tide, particularly protectionism that you mentioned. He maintained Trump-era tariff, and he's also trying to build small yard high fence against China, and also align with other countries trying to build more alliance in terms of export controls. So combining all this together, you've seen a very strange thing where the Biden himself is not necessarily protectionist, but he has to go with the political instinct and maintain his political support. He's not willing to spend political capital to further his agenda on climate change and other major issues. So now, in the end, he has only 4 years and he cannot accomplish whatever he set out to do. So overall, I think the poll is actually an accurate reflection of what his legacy is.
At least many of the people, how they look at President Biden from outside the country also, in a way. But let me just ask more, because there are so many news going on about the GPU controls, quota controls, as well as the TikTok issue. So to you, Mr. Wolf, the latest policies coming out of the Biden administration at the end of it, talking about the quota for GPU exports, and also categorize countries and economies into different groups, and asking them to align, quote unquote, with the United States, otherwise being punished by lack of quota. All of this has been receiving quite strong response and rebounds, shall I say, reactions coming from the tech industries and certainly from many of the economies. As someone in the industry, what is your take? Why the Biden administration did this, and what does that say about the nature of this administration?
I do think we're seeing a moment here where there's some effort to shape the policy to come in the next 4 years. In the last few months, there's this notion that this is the last chance to modulate an international stance and policy that appears to be taking form, although one doesn't know for sure, which is quite problematic on a number of levels. And one thing which is common when a middle class sort of is in the advanced state of decline that our middle class is your middle class can turn on the future and modernity and begin to be fascinated by a past in which they felt better, more well-positioned. I think we see that. And when that occurs politically, it means more fear and apprehension about tech and a little bit of a desire to try to prevent the forward march of time, because that forward march of time looks disadvantageous to you. Of course, there is no policy. There is no rule that a country can take that arrests the forward motion of time, and that's usually a messy and expensive misadventure. I think that's true of our foreign policy restrictions. I think that enjoying a brief technological advantage and making abnormal profits from innovation is an important part of the American system when it works well. I think restrictions on exports don't make sense. They make a more bitter, more competitive market, and they reduce the returns to the people who do the innovation, and they always also kind of beg for evasion. Okay. So I think you get, I think it's a mess, to be honest, and I don't think it puts us in a better
the issue
position.
of GPU probably is not necessarily in the same logic as the issue of TikTok, even though they're also linked to a certain extent, talking about so-called national security. So on that, Mr. Wolf, your thoughts, the TikTok issue likely to be handed over to the next administration, depending on the timetable.
Yeah, so I think seeing the TikTok issue as a national security issue is kind of absurd. I would point that to the sort of less well thought out propaganda machines, because the idea that a Chinese competitor who does the same thing as the American competitors is somehow more dangerous is the kind of logic I had hoped, perhaps overly hopeful, we had gotten beyond as a national polity. So I think it's absurd, to be honest, to couch it that way.
Yeah, I mean, TikTok is a reaction not to the company itself. It's really about anything that is success that says Chinese, it's automatically suspect. It has to be gotten rid of. It has to be chopped down, kind of like with China itself. It's all about a containment strategy. Unfortunately, containment will not boost the United States. And this is the very difficult situation that Trump is going to fail. He feels like if he can knock people down, that raises the U.S. up, but that's not how it works.
Right. They're very interesting. Both of you talk about the containment might not work in a fast-changing world. Mr. Zhao, we have seen on trade, when there are more tariffs, more shall I say, trade barriers, the exports from China to the United States are rising. When we see the AI, for example, technology controls coming from the US, we also hear experts saying, month ago, maybe China is 2 years behind, and now they're saying just a few months behind. And we are seeing the GPU issue now with the quota, and the industries are saying, we might not want to follow what you're saying, and we might want to seek other partners. By the way, Yansen Huang is in China right now, NVIDIA head. So quite interesting. How do you see this logic over here as a Chinese observer?
Well, I think technology has its own rules and and way of playing out by itself, and that should left to the technology community. And China and the United States, government to government, has established dialogue, and two sides can talk about security-related issues. However, for the government to have a very broad definition and very broad curbing of transfer of technology and also development technology is really beyond the scope of the government, and really, on the one side, is suffocating the development of technology, and on the other side, is ineffective in the end. So I don't know exactly how far, the gap between U.S. and China in terms of AI development.
Yeah.
But from the recent cases, you can see that China is catching up fairly quickly. And there are other, alternative technology trajectories that China can take. So I think any effort that trying to stop one country from developing its technology is really not necessary and ineffective. For the United States, the sole purpose is to maintain technological superiority. That's what they said. They want to maintain dominance in this area so that they can maintain their dominance on global political and economic side of the affairs. However, everybody knows that with this new technology, the U.S., if they only wanted to, having from a national security perspective, protect and maintain its superiority, it's not going to last long, and it's going to hurt the overall technology development around the world.
Right. Certainly, we heard the experts' view coming from all of you. It would also be interesting to hear opinions coming from those, what they call the TikTok refugees that are coming to other apps as we speak. You're watching World Insight. This is a live edition of our program. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back. This is World Insight. Our topic today is the farewell address by the U.S. President Joe Biden to be delivered in a few hours. Having said that, though, we are joined by our panelists, Peter Kuznick, Max Wolf, Zhao Hai, and Einar Tangen. Domestic politics always very important for any leaders in any economy and in any country. How is Joe Biden doing as a president? Professor Kuznick, we heard the media in the U.S. cover a lot about his late withdrawal from the presidential campaign. Also, he's unconditionally pardoning his son, as well as the ongoing wildfire in California and what has been done and what has been not. So domestically speaking, when it comes to politics, how much is he scoring?
Certainly, he hasn't helped himself in terms of his domestic legacy. The things that you point out, number one, his administration, his people seem to hide the fact that his faculties were declining. And he clung to this idea that he was the only one who could beat Donald Trump. And so he still had a run for a second term. But he performed so disastrously in that first presidential debate that it was clear to everybody that he was not up to the job. But he still clung much too long to wanting to run. That hurt his legacy. Pardoning his son would not have been such a big issue, except he kept on saying that he would not do so. And then it made him look like a hypocrite. So much of what has happened makes him look like a hypocrite. He condemns the Russian invasion of Ukraine and then arms the Israelis to do something even more horrific in Gaza, to flatten the country effectively. So it makes him look like a hypocrite. And he was hurt by his foreign policy. He was hurt by aspects of his domestic policy, too, partly because he was so tone deaf. Immigration could have been messaged very, very differently than Biden was able to do. And he waited to act much too long after the Republicans had seized that, especially Donald Trump, as a major issue for them. The inflation was hurting people. People were suffering under this economy. And that's partly because of the Russia policy. He wanted to take down Russia so badly that he continued to support Ukraine in a way that was removing Russia from much of the world economy and hurting the Western economy as a result. We see the situation across Europe now with serious economic problems.
Mr. Tanken?
Well,
I just try to ask the Americans in the room.
Okay. Well, I mean, he didn't create COVID. COVID was a fact. He came in. I think some people will say he gave away too much money, especially to people who were working. But the fact remains, after COVID, most democratically elected leaders have been pushed out. And in his case, he had 70% of American households just before the election saying that they felt that they were living paycheck to paycheck. This is something that's very hard. I used to run campaigns, and I can tell you that it's how people feel, not the reality. So he claims he did 16.5 million jobs, but truthfully, there was a 9.5 million job loss. Still, 7 million jobs is nothing to sneeze at. It's just he wasn't able to connect with the people.
We have seen China-U.S. relations evolving also, of course, over the past 4 years. As Chinese observer, Mr. Zhao, what do you think about that evolution over the past 4 years during the Biden administration? We're not here to give any scores to one president vis-a-vis another president, but it would be interesting for our audience all over the world to hear your opinion as well, coming from China. Mr. Zhao.
Well, I think overall the performance of this, his presidency, his performance on China-U.S. relations is mediocre at best. I think from China's perspective, he's saying one thing and doing another. So basically, he wanted to, successfully trying to establish some bottom line or a guardrail for this relationship. So far, China-U.S. has maintained relative strategic stability and particularly reestablished connections on multiple fronts between governments, particularly military to military. However, on the other side, when he promised many things, particularly on the issue of Taiwan, he has not delivered from China's perspective. And so far, the Taiwan issue has been a very thorny issue between the two sides. Also, other hotspots like in South China Sea and in also other areas, the United States continue to try to threaten China's national security, and also including the issues that we talk about on trade and technology, that even though two sides are talking, however, there's not much progress made between the two sides. He trying to persist on his China policy and believing that his China policy is working. And in his speech, he said that China's basically economic development has been altered, and the United States is right now on top, and China will never catch up with the United States. So I think it's the very idea that he wanted to maintain U.S. dominance in the world and not realizing the reality that prevent him from having a more realistic China policy for his administration. And also because there are many other foreign policy issues that are really distracting him from focusing on China. Therefore, at the end of his administration, I think he's not paying very much attention and trying to build or improve China-U.S. relations. So at the end, and particularly in the last couple of months, he's trying to throw everything out after the election. Yeah. And now I think in the end, China-U.S. relations can continue to deteriorate before the beginning of the next administration.
Yeah. Mr. Tangen, we know that the two presidents from China and United States, Mr. Biden and Mr. Xi, met with one another over several occasions, including the latest in Lima, Peru, on the sideline of the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting. Of course, both sides talk about the do's and don'ts and what needs to be achieved. But to you, how much really has been achieved, especially looking at Joe Biden's answers to the question?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with Zhao on this. It wasn't particularly distinguished. I mean, there were 5 times when he said he would take up arms to defend Taiwan. He was very, very, he invited Taiwanese leaders here. He was the president when Pelosi went to Taiwan. And they know very well that Taiwan is an absolute red line in China. So it's really hard to say that he's had a successful policy. He's had a lot of frameworks. He went down to Africa. He says, well, I have a framework for you. It still hasn't been developed. He had a summit of Americas. Unfortunately, he didn't invite all the South Americans, so many boycotted. The ones who showed up, they were invited to his office after coming for a 20-minute group talk where he basically talked and they listened and then they went home. For somebody who was in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, not what you would expect.
Mr. Wolf, technology area cooperation and interaction between China and the United States used to be extremely vibrant, and also talent exchanges on the issue as well. What do you think is the reality now? Whether is it going to serve anybody's benefit?
I mean, I don't think it serves anyone's benefit. As a person who works closely in the U.S., I can tell you that most of us in venture and investors in this business, we can tell you that immigrant founders are among the most robust and important founders. And if you actually look at the founders of the most dynamic industries in the United States, many of them don't fit the sort of make America great again definition of a true American, whatever that would mean. And we obviously don't all have to do that. But America's innovation economy is very tied to our openness to immigrants, to the possibility of getting funded as an immigrant in the United States, and to our university system, which draws heavily on the talent of the world, right? So to me, I always begin these conversations with a fact that might be reasonable to our conversation too. The United States has 4.5% of the world's population and falling. The United States has 17% of world GDP and falling. There is no such thing as a talent-based system that's meritocratic and robust that tries to restrict the other 95% of the world, other 85% of wealth creation. It's prima facie bizarre. I mean, imagine if you worked 4.5% of the days or used 17% of your resources. No one would think of you as a managerial superstar for very long, and your company's robustness would be open to question. So a bigger world benefits us all. A smaller, more hostile world appears to be coming. I hope not. But everyone contributing to smaller and more hostile is not contributing to the collective goals, needs, and aspirations of the greater human project.
Right. And many wonder what is the nature of American leadership today in the world. I want to thank all of you. Time is so limited for such a grand topic of analysis. Thank you so much, Peter Kuznick, Max Wolf, Zhao Hai, and Einar Tangen for being with us and sharing your insights. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight. Check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.